And welcome to the Cars Billington Proud to Farm podcast number 5. Coming to you today from a very damp but warm Carlisle. I'm your host, Lynn Candlish. We have 2 guests with us today. I would say old and new, but I'll get a serious side eye for that one. But instead I'll say familiar and fresh. So familiar to the podcast, we've got Jimmy Goldie, Chief Technical Officer, who is a friend of the podcast and has been on several times. We can hardly keep him away. Jimmy, just before we introduce our guest, do you want to give us a wee rundown on what you've been up to over the past few months and we've seen you?
Yeah, hi Lynn, glad to be back. Good to be here. Yeah, been an interesting summer. I read somewhere the other day we've had 4 heat waves this summer, so that's been quite interesting. It's been quite a challenge and quite
Sounds
a different...
about right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been quite a challenging summer. We always think what's normal, what's not normal in terms of what we've got. Some places we've had a lot of growth in this country. Some places it's been really dry and a lot less growth, which we'll talk about. Dairy herds have probably been performing quite well in some areas and others not, and we've had a bit of a challenge looking at that. Milk prices been holding up quite well, so we've been looking at how these herds are performing, how we look after them, and yeah, it's been quite a busy summer.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the dry and the wet of the summer in our subject focus, but first we'll introduce David Howard, who is our Technical and Sales Manager for England and Wales. Welcome, David, and well done for being brave enough to want to come and be thrust into the limelight of the podcast within your first few weeks of employment. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thank you for the invitation, and the introduction is fresh-faced. I've never had that before, so I'm flattered. Yeah, so thank you very much.
So what we thought we'd do a bit of an introduction on you. Mm-hmm. First of all, the accent. Where are you from?
Good question. So I'm originally from Cork, so Southern Ireland then. So I grew up on a dairy farm, small farm in County Cork, and about 18 years ago now, moved across actually to Scotland. So I did work the first part of my career in the UK, based in Glasgow, covering Ayrshire and South West Scotland. So I've probably got, if I have a slight mix or a slight twang in my accent, Jimmy's bringing out the Scottish in me ever so slightly. So so I moved across, so 18 years on this side of the Irish Sea. So I think in a couple of years' time, I'll be as long on this side of the Irish Sea as the other side of the Irish Sea, without giving away my age, hopefully, on that one.
Awesome. And what we thought, if you could just cover off a bit of the who's, what's, whys of your life in agriculture, how you started.
How long have we got? How long? We'll be here later on. So,
I've heard you can talk.
Yeah, I sure can. Yeah, the gift of the gab, I think, is what we have. So, no problem. So, I guess, going back to the farming roots in County Cork, we used to milk cows once upon a time. So, we still actually have a farm today, but it's moved into beef and sheep. So, like a lot of farms have transitioned, some farms have transitioned out of dairy into beef and sheep. And since I've moved over to this side of the Irish Sea, then I've always worked with, a combination of mixed farms, so dairy, beef and sheep, and then probably in the last 10 years, more of a dairy focus then. So, yes, that's been my sort of my career path. Always worked in nutrition then, so I've had various roles in the industry. And that sort of spans from, a keen interest in robotic milking. So I got into sort of having an interest in robotics probably 12 or 13 years ago, and still have quite a keen interest in being involved with robotic farms. And that's part of the market, I think, is growing quite strongly. And then I guess mineral nutrition then as well. So I've worked, again, I've had a role in mineral nutrition as well, so quite a focus on that as well. So so that's brought me to Cars Billington about a month ago. So I'm certainly fresh-faced into the business, as you say, and sort of excited to attack the opportunity.
And what elements of the agricultural industry really drive you and excite you?
So, another big question. I guess the big massive word, certainly for the last 4 or 5 years now, has been sustainability. So that focus, and I think that can be sort of, that word for a lot of farmers can be quite a negative word. And I've, I do farmer meetings, discussion groups and so on. And I always sort of, when I'm talking to farmers about sustainability, I'll often start by making the point that they have to be financially sustainable in the first instance in order to achieve the environmental sustainability as well. And I guess the point there is that a lot of what we consider now to be sustainable actions are actually good for the bottom line as well. So things like age at first calving, getting the average of age at first calving, is a good sustainable action, but it's also good for the bottom line as well, because we want these heifers putting milk in the tank as quickly as possible. And that then is an action that reduces your carbon emissions per litre of milk sold. Two other things, probably milk from forage as well. So again, milk from forage, or the more milk you can produce from homegrown, it stands to reason that is also very cost effective, and it's good for the bottom line, but equally it's a nice sustainable action as well. And I guess, Jimmy, on the beef side, we're looking at days to finish. The dairy cows, we want longevity. We want them to live as long a life as possible, and the beef, then it's days to finish to get that down. So that's been being involved with the sustainability side has been quite interesting, Lynn, as well.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we really look forward to getting to know you a lot more, because I've got a feeling you might end up jumping on another one of these, to be honest.
We'll see.
So we'll dive into the subject that we're going to cover today, and we've covered it a little bit before with Jimmy in earlier podcasts, but we want to talk about forage, because it's very much up in the air at the minute in terms of what people have got, where in the country, the types of summer that they've had, and they're worrying about winter stocks. We've seen in the news that we're supposed to have a wet September, but even if that comes, the growth that we're going to get from that is really far down the line. And how that varies north to south is massive as well. So you guys are quite geographically well placed to be able to talk about that. So if we kick off in the north, Jimmy, and you give us a rundown on what you feel the state of play is up there.
Yep. Always find this time of year is interesting, because we start off looking at what we're going to plan for the winter. So how we're going to feed stock, what we're going to look at. So looking at forage, David just said milk from forage and efficiency from forage is something we always look at. So how can we use what's on farm to start with, and how can we plan that for the winter? So that's always critical at this time of year, trying to see what we've got. It's so variable across the country this year. I always think we want to look and see what a normal winter looks like, and I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I don't think I've ever come across what a normal winter is. Every season's different, every farm's different, and we have to look at all that to see what we've got on farm and what we can do. In the north, way back in the spring, I sat here and we talked about a drought that we had in the north, and we were wondering where that was going to lead us through the summer. In the north, we actually got some rain, probably at the critical time, middle to end of May, and we've had actually really good grass growth throughout the summer period. It's been variable, and there was a few critical times where we thought we might run out, but it's managed to grow, and we've actually had a reasonable amount of grass growth over the season. We've got very variable grass silage. We've got some very dry first cut silages, which is quite unusual for the north. We usually end up with wet, low dry matter silage, but we've ended up with very dry stuff. We've then had variable second cut, some good yields, some not so good yields, and then we're looking now into fourth cut silage being made, and forage stocks on the whole been reasonably good. Quality's variable across the board, but on the whole pretty reasonable going into the winter, but still got to plan how we make the best use of that. But very different picture down in the south. So David, what have you been seeing over the last week or so just in the south of the country?
Yeah, so it's been I think the keyboard there is variation and massive variation as well. So I'm Cheshire based, so that's considered to be in the northwest on the BBC. I think it's the northwest. So, but it's our sort of like it's Carsbridge southern area then. Yep. So I'm Cheshire based, but we certainly get down into sort of like Leicestershire, Staffordshire, Shropshire, down even as far as Wiltshire as well. And the variation again, if you look at. I was looking at Met Office data this morning in preparation for today, and the rainfall map over the summertime is like, dark red is where it's been, way below normal levels. And that's definitely Midlands, South Midlands, and then down into the southwest of England as well. But regional variations, I was talking to a farmer in Shropshire last week, and he was saying in his maize harvest that he's expecting some of it's coming in this week, which is the last week of August at the point of recording. And he's got variation on his own farm. So between a 1 mile difference is he's got stuff that won't be ready for a few weeks yet, and then stuff that's ready to go this week. So I think for maize that's a fair. I
was going to say that's quite
record.
Early.
Yeah, it's very early. Yep. And then again, I scribbled down a few numbers from again rainfall in July. So again, sort of like that sort of your mid-season for growing maize for maize growers then, and just the difference between North Wales and South Wales was half the millimetres. So 83 or 4 millimetres in North Wales to 43.5 in South Wales. And that's only 130 miles of a difference. Mm-hmm. And actually, just a couple of days ago, I've been in Spain for a few days for a little holiday before getting stuck into the winter season and flying back in over the Bristol Channel. I took a picture of so South Wales and then the southwest, so into Devon and Cornwall then as well, and it looks like you could be landing in the Canaries. Like it's so yellow, like it's, we always think. But by the time I was coming into Manchester to land, then it was a different picture completely. So actually, where I'm Cheshire based, and it's been it's been a decent year for grass, and it's been a very good year for maize because we've had reasonable rainfall and reasonable heat as well. So, but big variation, Jimmy. Yeah.
So what do we do then if somebody's in the position now where they're really worrying about winter stocks? What's the next steps?
Lots of calculations. So need to do some
by experts.
We need to look at what we've got, where we're starting from, and then get a bit of a plan together in terms of what's there. So need to measure up some clamps, look at what stocks are there. What are we going, David say in terms of maize crops, what's still to come in? Are we still going to get some grass silage? You said September, are we going to get some rainfall? So are we going to get some late cut grass, which we may well do and may benefit from significantly? I think most cereal harvests are now completed across the country. Straw, there's probably been more straw baled in the country because of the demand for it. But we need to do a bit of adding up. David, you were going to talk about looking at how to measure up a silage clamp.
Yeah, so just a couple of points, I suppose, on that one then. And that's obviously, it's good advice in a normal year, is just to measure what you've got.
Yep.
And put a forage budgeting plan from September. So you're not caught out in sort of like, February, March, you're running out of first cut or second cut or maize silage then.
And now is the time to do it. You can't leave it any later.
I mean, you can, even if, people still waiting for maize harvest, you can estimate, the acres times the expected, yield per acre then. So there's a huge variation. I think anyone that's got 14 tonnes to the acre is doing really well this year in certain parts, but you could, take half that for other areas that have struggled with rain then as well. So certainly measuring and just like still on that point. So then, the calculation is you work with your nutritionist or your feed advisor on it, but it's taking the dimensions of the clamp, so length by width by height, and then there's a calculation, there's feed tables you can look at that will give you the cubic meter weight either in fresh weight or dry matter basis. But again, I do like simpler ways as well. If you have a piece of crayon, your big piece of crayon, just drawing in the silage clamp wall, so you can do your calculation based on the tables then, but also just maybe at the end of every month or every week, just drawing on the silage pit wall the date, and looking at the difference between, week on week or month on month, just to check that your calculation is correct. So that's quite a simple way of making sure that, by the time you're halfway through the clamp, that's halfway through your feeding season, for example. So practical tip as well.
Yeah, I think updating it as we go through the winter is really important as well, just so you can keep track of what you're using, what's left, and what's there is quite good. A lot of first cut silages are very dry, and I know I've done a couple of calculations. When you look at the clamp, it doesn't look as full, but it's the water that's missing. So we've got some first cut silages that are 40-50% dry matter, which normally we get them at 20, 25, 30% dry matter. So there's that, doing that calculation this year is even more important because there's that variation from clamp to clamp just because of dry matter as well. And
just the other thing, maybe the last point on that as well, is that the last time I checked the tables that give you the cubic the weight per cubic meter then, clamps, probably since those calculations have been done, clamps are getting much higher. And there's more weight on rolling equipment now as well. So I think there's a little bit more weight, which in this type of year is good. Yeah, because we should have more weight per cubic meter. So it brings you back to the practical point, maybe of just drawing a little line on the silage clamp wall then as well.
Keep track of it.
Yeah.
So you've talked about the variance in the quality of the silage. At this stage, if you're, whatever cut you've done, in terms of the quality of it, if you're worrying about that, what can you do about that now?
So a number of different things. It's starting working out stock on the farm. So what do we need to feed? What the nutritional requirements are. So we need to look at energy. We need to look at protein. We need to look at fibre. And we then need to look at where that's all coming from. So we need to then the balance of starting off with the forage. Every diet we do is 50% forage. So we need to know the nutritional quality of that forage, get it analysed, look at how that compares to what we're trying to achieve on farm, and then look at how we balance that up. In some cases, it's straightforward with putting some concentrate in to balance up the silage, but where we're short of forage, once we've done that forage budget, we then need to look at a few other alternatives and different options of how that diet looks like, how that nutrition is pulled together.
And there's a few options then in terms of so filling those deficits then. Let's say you've done your forage budget you've done your calculation for the winter ahead. You've identified the fact that you're short, X amount of tons if you are short. And then it's coming up with some strategy then. So, prioritising groups is probably, for dairy farms, it's maybe thinking about prioritising the highest quality forages into your high group, your fresh cows maybe as well. So thinking about prioritising cows on farm. And then you might be into then trying to fill those deficit gaps. So the first thing, again, I always advise is, if the best thing to replace forage with is more forage again.
Yeah.
So, but that's easier said than done. I've got a lot of feedback from farmers at the moment that there's no grass silage for sale. There's no bales for sale.
Yeah, there's nothing to spare.
There's nothing, exactly. So again, but it's a box you kind of have to tick off before you get to your next thing. Like moist feed is very popular. And again, that does vary a lot in terms of its price regionally as well. So the further north you get, maybe up into this area, certainly up into Scotland, they seem to drink a lot of whiskey. So there's a lot of, there's a big brewing industry and distilling industry in Scotland. But I know some of the prices that we've heard in sort of the Midlands, South Midlands for brewers' grains is sort of 70 and 80 pounds a tonne. So you've then got a calculation to make is what is the value of a tonne of dry matter? If you're trying to replace a tonne of silage or maize or old crop, it's what's the value of the moist feed. So, brewers' grains, again, as an example, is 22 to 24%. Dry matter, so, just a sort of a quick calculation, if it's 70 pounds a tonne, times it by 4, and, you're 280, 300 pounds per tonne of dry matter, so take all the water away. And that then becomes maybe your starting point for thinking, what are the other options? So then you're into maybe some of your fibres, like things like sugar beet, soy hulls, wheat feed, and they potentially, because there's a lot less water, there are a lot drier products, there's potentially a lot better value in those types of products, either reformulated through your blend or your ration or bought separately as a forage extending option then. But there's a few points to consider, I guess, Jimmy, on the nutritional value, particularly wheat feed and starch levels in wheat feed.
Yeah, it's looking at that balance all together. We tend to always think that we need to start with grass silage because that's what we're always used to, that's where we're at. But in reality, it's about the nutrients that the animal needs, but we need the energy, the protein and the fibre.
Yeah.
And it's looking at how that is sourced, whatever the raw materials are, whether that is forage, whether it's moist feed, whether it's other concentrate feeds, and it's looking at what that nutrition is supplied. And we can actually get quite extreme that we can look at putting diets together without any grass silage at all, but we need to make sure that the rumen is looked after, it's healthy, so we're making sure that we've got the right level of fibre in there to make the rumen work. And as David said, looking at the starch levels, we'll get response performance out of starch, but we need to make sure we don't create acidosis and upset the rumen function, in which case we don't get that performance. So we've got to keep looking at what the source of that nutrition is and how we balance it up.
So in summary, David, what are the key actions that you'd be thinking about taking on farm at the minute?
Yeah, so as we said initially, measuring and analysing, certainly to begin with anyway, so measuring forage stocks, analysing what is in stock, and then moving on to calculating deficits. For some people, again, depending on regionally, there may not be deficit at all. Fantastic. So then it's into normal planning for forage budgeting for the winter ahead then. And then you're into looking at, for managing deficits then, it's what is the best value per tonne of replacement for forage. So we mentioned about moist feed, we mentioned about concentrate use, we mentioned about purchasing forage locally if available as well. And probably the last point to mention there is thinking about animals that are potentially, again, in the dairy herd that are performing under the average or that are sort of, that are not doing the business. So basically, that cow's place in the herd is valuable at the moment because the milk price is very, very good. So the milk price to feed price ratio, I can remember it being as attractive as what it is at the moment. So it's considering, is there animals that could be replaced for more productive animals that will help with forage stocks if you can, reduce the number of cows in the herd as well.
Okay. And what about beef and sheep? Is there a bit more to be covered on that?
It's interesting. I always think that I love the month of September, but sometimes September can be a very challenging month because we need to look at where stock are going heading into the winter. So that counts dairy, beef and sheep, and looking at body condition. So over the summer, we've probably had a fair bit of heat stress in animals. So how have they performed? What's fertility been like over the summer? That might have been a challenge for some of the beef herds. A lot of them would be getting served in June. So how have they served to the bull, and what condition are they in coming into the winter? The same with sheep. A lot of breeding ewes will be going to the top over the next few months. Some are already there. And again, just looking at that body condition and how they've come through the summer, we need to maybe just take stock again of that and decide whether there's any remedial action needed. The same with dairy cows. Depends what grass is like just now. Are some cattle going to be housed early because grass has run out? Or if we get the rain in September that you're promising, Lynn, does that mean that we're going to be able to keep them out? And it always worries me that sometimes they're kept out too long. And David made the comment earlier that you get the phone call in the beginning of October and say, these cows aren't quite performing, they're not quite how they should be. And that's the damage that's done during September. I think we just need to keep monitoring. We need to look at that. We need to see what else is in place to make sure we look after the body condition of that animal, and that sets us up nicely for the winter. So there's a lot of planning at this time of year with forage, with the cattle, with the sheep, just making sure that we know where we're starting from, and then hopefully we can sail through the winter.
Yeah, but I mean, although there's showers coming, it's still going to be relatively warm. And what is the long-lasting effect of the heat stress there? It's because it's been a really warm summer. I know what it's like for us. We're all dead shiny here today.
Back in May, I very naively thought, we're getting rain, we'll have grass by the next day.
Yeah.
And clearly that didn't happen. And you're absolutely right, Lynn. It takes a lot to recover. We've got really sort of low moisture deficit in the soil. So if we get a heavy rain, that's just going to run off. It's not going to soak into the soil. So we need to look at what some of the soil's like and how they're going to recover and what's in there in terms of that crop and grass and how that moisture sort of regains. We know a lot of reservoirs and rivers are way below normal, so it is going to take quite a bit to top that back up. That's not going to happen instantly. We're going to take a little while before we get back to what normal looks like and just what crops we can still get going through into the winter months as well.
So David, we talked about housing and you mentioned something earlier. What does that effect have on the overall of what's about to happen?
Again, it's probably back to the planning that Jimmy had said as well, but maybe just to pick up as well on the heat stress, it's I think we have, and we've said it a few times, I think we've had a very abnormal summer for heat, but it seems to be the direction of travel is that we're getting hotter, more extreme summers, and it's not underestimating the fact that cows have really struggled in the summertime. So, we mentioned 4 heat waves at the start, and for dairy cows, whether housed or outside, it's the humidity index. So what we get in the UK is we get the heat plus humidity, and that gives us the thermal humidity index. So we don't have to have 25 or 30 degrees extremes at all for cows to really struggle. We can have 22 degrees with humidity, and that's enough to make me struggle, and I'm struggling just a small bit today. I'm sitting in here because it has been quite humid, as you said, Lynn, at the start. So, and what that just means, again, just in terms of forward planning, is not to underestimate the effect that those bouts of heat have had, especially on things like dry matter intakes, both at grass and probably housed as well. And if the dry matter intake is affected, because in hot weather, rumination generates a lot of heat. So the last thing the cow wants to do is generate even more heat when they're hot. So dry matter intake can suffer. And that can lead to some body condition loss that we've mentioned. And that then leads on to fertility effects. So there's a general trend, I think, with hotter summers of seeing the fertility dip over summer months, where heat abatement or prevention measures like installation of fans and so on have not been taken place, then I think we've been suffering just a little bit more. So it's, and as we mentioned as well, I think where cows have been out of grass, body condition, again, it's important to monitor that, and where they have lost condition, it could take the first 6 or 8 weeks once they do get housed to put on some visceral fat, so the fat on the inside, to build up some reserves again. So again, it's probably managing expectations in terms of what's realistic after housing then.
Yeah. Just bringing it back to the heat stress thing as well, though, I seen an article by HDB this morning talking about for long-term, hotter, longer summers and what we're going to do because it needs to be tackled. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting speaking to a few customers that are looking at building new dairy units and just looking at what they look like in terms of providing shade and cool environment for these animals. So making sure ventilation is right, stocking rate within the building is correct, and making sure that is designed with that in mind, that if we are going to get hotter spells throughout the seasons to come, then we need to look at designing correct housing, whether it's for baby calves, whether it's for adult cows, summer and winter, to make sure that we're providing that right environment. We see a lot of dairy buildings now with fans installed in them so that we're getting that flow of air. And yeah, it makes quite a significant difference. And it's interesting, both David and I have done cow signals, and it's interesting watching cow behaviour. And when you see animals in a building, they migrate to where there's a little bit of fresh air, or they know they can sense it far more than we can. So it's quite interesting when you look at what we find comfortable, but more importantly, what cows find is comfortable, and making sure that they've got plenty of good fresh air, and they're kept cool in hot spells.
Yeah, because we've just had, is it 5 or 6 of our colleagues just newly qualified in cow signals? Mm-hmm. Talk us through that and what they've got to do to be a qualified cow signaller.
Yeah, so it's I've kind of been a bit of a cow psychologist. So it's looking at and I'm fascinated by people watching and cow watching, and just watching that behaviour. And it's looking at getting the best environment for that animal. So it's looking at just what the animal's telling us. So making sure it's got good access to feed, it's got plenty of space, it's got we like a nice comfortable bed at night. So it's a little bit the same as making sure that the cow has a nice comfortable bed. And by just watching cows, you can see they tell you if they're comfortable, they tell you if they're happy. So it's just taking a little bit more thought about that and making sure they've got good clean water, they've got plenty of good clean food, and we're looking after them the best we can. And it's just a little bit of perspective and looking at it and stepping back sometimes and just looking at a building and watch for a little while and see what's happening. And yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. You've done it as well.
Yeah, a similar experience. It's the cow is always the best judge of the ration and the environment, but also as well, there's a few points of data that we can look at as well. So a lot of farms that use heat detection collars now, they also pick up rumination and they pick up eating time as well. So again, if the farmer can find the report within those, the milking parlour software, you'll be finding in hot weather, again, if you're sort of almost trying to prove it to yourself that the hot weather is having an effect on cows. The rumination, we often see that the rumination minutes can drop off in hot weather because, again, the cows want to generate less heat in hot weather, so less rumination equals a little bit less heat. But then you're into issues with digesting their ration and so on. But the eating time, I've been looking at some data on a few farms for eating time. So that's again, when the cow is eating, her head is in the down position, and the microphone can pick up on the rumination from the jaw. Then
so it's on via a microphone.
Correct. Yeah, and so it's the like the gyroscope, like in your iPhone, the way the screen flips around. So that's the motion sensor, and then it's listening to the chewing action as well. So it can measure the minutes of eating time. And again, sometimes you don't always see the rumination minutes drop off, but the eating behaviour changes dramatically. So we've had temperatures up to sort of 28, 30 degrees in the last month. And you see the cows, well, what they'll naturally do, again, in a housed environment, is they'll want to eat when it's cooler in the morning and cooler in the evening. So you think it's almost like gorging behaviour. So they're almost creating a risk of acidosis then, because instead of eating their meals spread out over the day, a lot more in the morning and a lot more in the evening. And that's compounded then by, if they're going into the milking parlour to get 3 or 4 kilos of concentrate on top of that behaviour, again, that can create a real risk for acidosis. So sometimes the technology and the points of data out of the software can help with identifying those periods of risk as well.
So all those numbers, it sounds like there's an awful lot of science involved. Can you tell us a bit more? Yeah,
there's certainly a lot of science involved. And I guess when you look at some of the technologies on farm nowadays that are helping us to monitor data and cow performance, often I don't feel sometimes it's a question of having more data, but it's been able to interpret what's already available. And go back to those rumination collars that are measuring eating time, often the report is a little bit hard to find. It's there's a little bit of clicking involved to get into the type of data. So for a lot of people, a lot of advisors, I guess nowadays, the trick has been able to extract what's valuable and useful and actionable data then and what's not. So there's certainly a lot of data there to help us interpret what's happening.
And we can see that way we can then get optimal performance. Yeah. We can look after the welfare of the animals, but also get the best performance out of them as well. So it's a good balance. And again, we've said about measuring everything, monitoring everything. It gives us a good insight into what's happening on farms.
So we've spoken about heat stress. We've talking about building our forage stocks for winter. We probably can't see past December at this point, but looking into spring and summer, what should we be thinking of in terms of the lessons we've learned from this year?
Yeah, farming never stops. We've got to keep thinking about it. We've got to keep planning. We've got to look forward all the way. On individual farms, what does it look like just now? What does it look like going forward? Do we need to change the cropping plan? Do we need to look at more drought-resistant crops? Where does that fit in? Quite a number of farms have sown multi-species lays. One of the big advantages of that is they've got a deeper tap root, so we're looking at some more drought-resistant species in there. Depends on the soil. Back, I think the first podcast, we talked quite a bit about soil structure and what that looked like and whether it's grass, whether it's other crops, other forages, how that looks like and how we can deal with that going forward. If climate change is something that we need to address, we continually adapt. I always think we don't change anything. Everything's the same as we've always done. But in reality, we adapt all the time. And I think there is a little bit of that as well, that we need to look at what's right for individual farms and how we adapt our cropping plan, our farming practice to make sure we can deal with everything that's thrown at us.
Yeah, and probably just the last thing to add to that is, if we've said in a lot of parts of the UK they're going to be short for the winter, and we're talking about deficits and how to fill those deficits, equally thinking about the other end, as you said, hard to think past Christmas, but it's filling those gaps again for next year. So it's almost thinking about, again, cropping strategies, as Jimmy said, and sort of building up some reserve again. If we have a late spring, we could be in a very bad position. It could be an early spring. So again, it's thinking about being more resilient in what we're doing and having some stock levels built up in the silage clamps again, because it does. I don't know. It sort of feels like it's more than one in every 3 or 4 years now. It seems to be getting a little bit more. Whether it's very wet, very dry, very hot, or a new record on something else. So yeah, building up those forage stocks, I think, thinking into next year is certainly one to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, just looking at the stock on farm and just what that whole farm business looks like is quite important, and just looking at that whole structure.
Yeah.
So again, it's all about planning. So
we've jumped about quite a bit there, guys, and covered a broad selection of subjects. Jimmy, give me your take home from today.
Plan. We've got to sometimes take a step back and just look at what we've got and work out what's right for each individual farm. Nobody's the same. We've got to look at what's right for each business. It'll be a slightly different plan from everybody. But yeah, we've just got to have think a little bit about where we're going.
And David, best advice for our listeners and viewers today?
I certainly couldn't disagree with the planning aspect anyway. But like, it goes back to the old cliche of a stitch in time. So like that planning at this time of year, again, last week of August for the winter, like being able to alter a couple of kilograms of grass silage replaced with something, whatever that something might be at this stage, will certainly pay dividends into next year. So the last thing we want really is to be sort of looking at the back of the silage pit wall at the end of January or February. So making those changes, whatever the agreed plan is to put that into action as soon as possible to manage the deficits.
Grand. Well, thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, David. And no doubt we'll see you both again.
Look forward to it.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Well, that was a great discussion. Great subjects brought up there from both David and Jimmy. Really enjoyed that. Thank you for watching and listening. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you have any subjects you would like us to cover, please add details in the comments. Until then, we'll see you at the next podcast.